Hello all, welcome to Narayana IAS Academy. This is Sureka Bhaskar presenting to you the daily news analysis. In today's discussion, we have picked up a list of topics from The Hindu and the Indian Express which hold immense significance and importance from the UPSC CSE examination point of view. So let us look into the topics. The first topic we will discuss about the recent plea on the urgent implementation of women quota that has been rejected by the Delhi High Court. Followed by that, we look into the opportune moment to rediscover Chennai's hydrology, where this is an editorial where the author discusses about the increasing vulnerability of Chennai to catastrophe of urban flooding. And we will be then discussing the MLA LAD, that is like the MP LADS Local Area Development Scheme, where the fund has been risen by the Delhi government. The next one is the NATO member Finland to grant US access to 15 military bases, where we'll be discussing about the institution of NATO, India and NATO, as well as the recent member Finland actually signing a defense pact with the United States, the provisions under which 15 of its bases can be accessible by the United States. The next one, we will talk about how hottest Arctic summer has affected the region both ecologically and economically. The first article for today is the Delhi High Court recently rejecting the plea. The plea actually sought for the urgent implementation of the provisions of the Women Reservation Bill 2023. So this particular topic is relevant from GS Paper 2, that is Government Policies and Interventions for the Development in Various Sectors. And we'll be discussing about women reservation as well as women empowerment in India. So let's look into the news. Before that, if we look into the previous year questions, that is the relevance of this topic can be mapped to the previous year questions. If you look into the prelims question, there was a question on the reservation of women in the legislature and the question on Government of India Act as well as Montague-Chelmsford reforms of 1919. So there was also a mains question in 2019 which asked that the reservation of seats for women in the institutions of local self-government has had a limited impact on the patriarchal character of Indian political processes and comment. So from here we understand that the reservation of women in the legislature as well as the local self-government becomes important from the exam perspective. So let's get into the news. So recently there was a plea in the High Court, and to which the Delhi High Court had actually declined to entertain it because the plea sought the urgent implementation of the provisions of the Women Reservation Bill 2023. The Women Reservation Bill aimed to provide 33% of reservation to women in the Lok Sabha, in the state legislative assemblies and the state legislature of the National Capital Territory of Delhi. So let's look into the news. So let's have a brief background. So let us look into the timeline of the bill. So the Women Reservation Bill was passed by both the houses of the parliament, that is the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha, in September 2023, and it also got the presidential assent in the same month. So this essentially became the act. So let us look into the implementation of the Women Reservation Bill 2023. The government actually contended that in order to ensure fair and equitable reservation, it will be possible to bring into effect the provisions of the bill only after the delimitation exercise that will be conducted in 2026 after the decadal procedure of census. So ideally, our previous census was in 2011, followed by which it had to be released by 2021, and this was not possible due to the unforeseen situations of the COVID pandemic and other unfortunate reasons. So now let us understand what is this procedure of delimitation exercise, why it is done, what is the authority that carries on the delimitation exercise. So delimitation is nothing but the act of redrawing the boundaries of Lok Sabha and the state assembly seats in order to represent any change in the population. So delimitation is actually carried out by the Delimitation Commission. The Delimitation Commission is a high power body that carries out the exercise of delimitation, and so far the Delimitation Commissions have been established 4 times, that is 1952, in 1963, 1973, and in 2002, followed by the respective Delimitation Commission Acts. Okay, so now let's look into the provision of Article 82. This Article 82, it empowers the Parliament with the authority to enact the Delimitation Act after every census. And Article 170 of the Constitution, it empowers the state to be divided into territorial constituencies. What is the objective of this particular exercise of delimitation is that in order to provide equal representation to equal segments of the population. The next one is for fair division of geographical areas. So this is done so that one political party actually does not have an advantage over the other in a particular geographical area. And the next one is to follow the principle of one vote and one value. So moving ahead, the last delimitation exercise was carried out in the year 1976, and this delimitation exercise was based on the 1971 census. And after 1976, it was actually frozen and extended till the year 2021, and it further got extended by the 84th Constitution Amendment Act of 2002. So this is a brief background of the Women Reservation Bill and what is the government's proposal and on how to bring the provisions into existence. So now moving on to the key features of the Women Reservation Bill. The bill provides reservation to 1/3 of all the seats of women in the Lok Sabha, the state legislative assemblies and the legislative assemblies of the National Capital Territory of Delhi. So this particular thing will also apply to the seats reserved for the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes in the Lok Sabha and the legislative assemblies. The reservation will be provided for a period of 15 years. This is very important, and that shall continue. That is, this 15 years will continue and it will be carried on, subsequently till such date as determined by a law made by the Parliament. Now, the seats reserved for women will be on rotation basis after every delimitation as determined by the law of the Parliament. So now let us look into the status of reservation of women in India. After the enactment of the 73rd and the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act of 1993, it provided 1/3 seats reserved for the women in the local self-government bodies of panchayats and the municipalities. Other constitutional provisions that actually gives empowerment to women in terms of reservation include Article 15, Clause 3 of the Constitution, which says that the state is empowered to make special provisions, legislative or otherwise, to secure women's socio-political advancement. Following by this, we have Article 325 that guarantees equal rights for both the sexes and entitles women to enjoy the economic, social, cultural and the political rights on an equal footing with that of men. Moving ahead, the Constitution also provides for the reservation of seats in the Lok Sabha and the state legislative assemblies for the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes. So here, it is important to note that there is no particular reservation for women in the legislature, that is in the Lok Sabha and the state legislative assembly. So the Constitution does not provide for reservation of the seats of women in the Lok Sabha and the state legislative assemblies. So what is basically the need for women reservation in India? First one is underrepresentation. If you see, India ranks 144 out of 193 countries in the representation of women in the parliament according to Inter-Parliamentary Union's latest report. And also, only 15% of the members of the 17th Lok Sabha, that is 2019 to 2024, are women. And women make up only 9% of the total members of the state legislative assemblies. And the next need for women reservation is that reservation empowers women in order to make meaningful contributions. And if you look at a standing committee report on personal public grievances, law and justice, it shows that women elected under reservation policies, they invest more in public goods related to the women's concerns. Moving ahead, it helps us to eliminate gender discrimination and it empowers women as outlined in the preamble of the Constitution. The next is the argument against women reservation. So, women reservation is perceived as a lack of merit-based competition. That is, by providing women reservation, it is perceived that reservation is provided based on the gender and not by merit. So, critics argue that women's reservation may imply that gender, not merit, determines political positions. And next, failure to address broader electoral reforms, because only by providing the reservation to women does not solve larger political problems like criminalization of politics and corruption. Moving ahead, potential to benefit privileged women. Providing reservation may mainly help privileged women and leave out or flush away the marginalized sections of the society. Next is impact on constituency representation. That is, rotating reserved seats may reduce the MP's incentive to serve their constituency well and efficiently. Moving on, we will look into the proxy culture. This is very, very common even if you observe the representation of women and their efficient performance in the local self-governments of Panchayati Raj as well as municipalities. There is this proxy culture where elected women may have limited power and act as tokens for the decisions predominantly made by men. Further, qualified men losing opportunities. So, reserving seats for women could result in qualified men missing out on political positions. The next article we'll be discussing about is this editorial from The Hindu, that is the opportune movement to rediscover Chennai's hydrology, where the author discusses about the increased vulnerability of Chennai to the catastrophe of flooding in the recent past, specifically with respect to its 2005 floods, 2015 and 2023. And the 2023 has been the worst affected year by floods when compared to the past 47 years. So this particular topic becomes important from GS paper 1 geography, urbanization, their problems and their remedies, and GS paper 3 environmental pollution and degradation. So moving ahead, if we look into the PYQs, there is a mains question in 2016 where it reads the frequency of urban floods due to high intensity rainfall increasing over years, and this was asked after the 2015 floods of Chennai. And the next question reads, account for the huge flooding of million cities in India, including the smart cities like Hyderabad and Pune. So from here, we need to understand that the concept of flooding and the concept of urban floods become important from the exam perspective. Now let us go to the news. So we know that Chennai has been repeatedly experiencing devastating floods since 2005, and the specific events of extreme flooding has been in 2005, 2015 and 2023, where 2023 flood was the worst in the 47 years. While the author discusses climatic factor as one of the aspects, he also says that it should not be used to cover up the human errors and the poor urban planning decisions that we make. So with respect to the human errors, he points out few of the human errors, like the first one is encroachment and degradation of water bodies. The next one is flawed urban planning. The next is lack of preparedness. Next, the policy paralysis. And finally, discusses about climate as a factor. So moving ahead, we will look into the background. So we know that Chennai was hit by the tropical cyclone Michong recently, where parts of Tamil Nadu received very heavy rain, leading to immense loss of lives and property damage due to flooding. So now we'll look into the factors responsible for Chennai's repeated flooding vulnerability. As I told you, the first one is the encroachment on the water bodies and wetlands. So what happens is when we encroach the water bodies and wetlands, they ultimately reduce encroaching them reduces their capacity to store water, that will further lead to increased surface runoff. The second one is pollution and siltation. If we look at the rivers specifically in Chennai, specifically Kuvam and Adayar, extreme siltation and pollution of these rivers and canals have hindered the drainage efficiency of these rivers. The next one is rapid unplanned urban expansion, which will eventually result in the loss of natural drainage channels and insufficiently designed drainage systems. Moving on, the climate change. This leads to more intense rainfall and raising the sea levels, and this actually further overwhelms the drainage system and increases the risk of coastal flooding. Then moving on is the policy paralysis and the institutional failures, where we have the inadequate early warning systems, the lack of public awareness, and there are very weak enforcement regulations in place that contribute to cities' repeated vulnerability to flooding. So now let us look into the concept of urban flooding and then move on to the increasing urban flood risk in India. So what is urban flooding? It is nothing but the inundation of land in particularly in densely populated regions due to excessive rainfall. So basically urban flooding is nothing but when you see the densely populated regions, especially cities, what happens is there is inundation of land in densely populated regions due to excessive rainfall. So this is called as urban flooding. So we need to understand the difference between urban flooding and rural flooding. So these actually differ mainly in three to four parameters. The first one being the flood intensity. The next is the vulnerability, followed by the economic impact. So the flood intensity in the urban areas, because of its high encroachment as well as lot of anthropogenic activities and urban activities, we have the intensity of flooding being the highest in the urban level when compared to that of the rural flooding, and the vulnerability of the urban areas is higher when compared to rural areas, and the economic impact that it causes in terms of property damage as well as the day-to-day activities is actually more in the urban when compared to that of the rural. Now let us look into the increasing trends in urban risk in India. So we know that there has been an increasing trend of urban flood disasters in India over the past several years, where major cities in India have been severely affected. If you see the Chennai floods of 2023, Mumbai floods of 2017, floods in Guwahati and Bengaluru in the years of 2017, and Hyderabad floods of 2020 have been proven extremely catastrophic. Then the NDMA, National Disaster Management Authority, it reports that 30% of India's land mass is prone to floods, which affects around 250 million people. So now let us look into what are the causes of urban floods. If you look into this infographic, the causes can be meteorological factors and anthropogenic factors. Meteorological factors are natural factors which are heavy rainfall, which result in prolonged rain that overwhelms the urban drainage system. The cyclonic storms and thunderstorms. Next is the climate change, where the increased frequency of extreme weather events are actually evidenced. Next are the anthropogenic factors, where these are predominantly the causative factors to the urban flooding. like urbanization and land use changes, floodplain occupation and obstructions, creation or development of urban heat island, dam operation, improper waste disposal, and illegal mining activities. So, what are the solutions to this urban flooding? The first one is restoration of wetlands, floodplains, and the natural channels. So this one will actually restore them back to the original functions that will allow them to absorb and store water. For instance, if you see in Mumbai, they have initiative like the City Fix Lab and the Climate Proof Cities movement that are dedicated exclusively for revitalizing the lakes. Next one is proper solid waste management that will prevent the blockages in the draining channels and that will ensure proper disposal of waste. Moving ahead, we have urban green spaces, specifically in cities like Paris as well as Singapore, where the large open areas like the parks and playgrounds are converted into water resilient landscapes. So they manage floodwater, and apart from that, they also enhance the urban biodiversity, and also they provide recreational havens for the citizens. Moving on, we have the sponge city concept that originated in China in the early 2000s, which is nothing but it is an urban area that is completely designed to absorb and store rainwater in order to prevent flooding. So sponge cities, they use natural elements. If you can see here, they use natural elements like trees, parks and lakes in order to absorb rainwater. And also they use permeable construction models like the green roofs, rain gardens and permeable pavements that will absorb the water and thereby prevent flooding. The next news that we'll be discussing is on the MLA LAD schemes. Okay, this particular topic is in news because the Urban Development Minister in the Delhi Assembly has announced that the funds allocated for the MLA LAD scheme has been raised from 4 crores to 7 crores. So here we'll be discussing about both the MP LADs and the MLA LADs. MLA LADs are nothing but Member of Legislative Assembly Local Area Development Scheme. So this particular news is relevant from the UPSC syllabus under Government Policies and Intervention of Development in Various Sectors, and also comes under separation of powers between various organs. This is because when we give a particular function to the legislator, and when the legislator performs the functions of the executive, then it is seen as an inconsistency in the constitutional provisions of separation of powers. So let us actually discuss about the criticisms of the scheme, the various provisions under this. So if we look into the previous year question, we have a question on the MP LAT. So from here, you know that this particular topic is important from the exam point of view. So the context, as I told you, the Urban Development Minister has announced in the Delhi Assembly that the funds for the member of the Legislative Assembly Local Area Development, that is the MLA-LAD scheme, has raised from 4 crores to 7 crores. So here, let us discuss the provisions of both the MLA and the MP LAD scheme so that it will be easier for us to understand. So MLA LAD scheme is nothing but with respect to the state or the UTs with the legislature. That is nothing but it is the same as that of MP LAT scheme of the union government. So both of them have the same objective. It is just that the amount that is credited to the legislators are different in the state and the union. Let's look into the MP LAT scheme. Now let us look into the objective of the scheme. This is to enable the members of the parliament in order to recommend works of developmental nature. And finally, their aspiration is to emphasize on the creation of durable community assets. So moving ahead, about the scheme, it is nothing but a central sector scheme which is implemented by the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, MOSPI. And under this scheme, each Lok Sabha MP has the choice to suggest to the district collector for the work of the tune of 5 crores per annum in the particular constituency that he or she is elected in. The next one is a Rajya Sabha member of the parliament can also recommend the work in one or more districts of the state from where he or she has been elected. Now moving on to the nominated members of both the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha. They can select any one or more districts from any one of the state in the country for the implementation, and this is as per their choice of work under the scheme. Moving on, MLAs or the MPs do not receive any money under the scheme. Instead, the government directly transfers it to the respective local authority. So here it is the district collector. Moving on, at least 15% of the total MP LADS fund per year should be entitled for the areas which are predominantly inhabited by the scheduled caste population, and at least 7.5 for the areas which are inhabited by the scheduled tribe population in the constituency. And funds under the scheme are non-lapsable. One good thing is that it can be carried forward to the next year. Now, what are the works permissible under the scheme? What are the works which are not permissible or prohibited under the scheme? The creation of immovable public assets on the government-owned land like education, public health, drinking water and sanitation, animal husbandry, dairy and fisheries, agriculture and farmer welfare. So all these are the assets, that is the immovable assets, can be created under the scheme. And the works which are not permissible under the scheme include all work involving commercial and private establishments, assets for individual family benefits, pooling of these funds with the corporate social responsibility funds, and works in any kind of unauthorized colony, and any grants and loans are not permissible under this particular scheme. Moving ahead, let us look into the monitoring of the scheme. As I told you, the monitoring agency will be the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. And this looks into the fund allocation, the project cost and the fund utilization, and brings out the annual report every year. And for MLA LADS, we have the scheme, that is, we have separate provisions that the state governments that will bring out from their own mechanism. Now, criticism of the scheme. First is constitutional inconsistency. It involves, that is, this particular scheme involves legislators carrying out the executive functions, and this is actually against the provisions of the constitutions, where there is blurring of the provision of separation of powers between the legislator and the executive. Next is corruption allegations. There have been allegations of corruptions related to allocation of works under MP LADS, which raises concerns about the transparency and fairness in the process. Moving ahead, let us actually make the comparison a bit easier. If you look into the tabular column, the implementing authority will be the members of the parliament, whereas for MLA LADS, it is the members of the legislative assembly. The jurisdiction is, it caters to pan-India, that is its national level, and here it is the state level. The funding allocation is by the central government, and here it is by the state government. And the scope of the projects that can be taken up here includes infrastructure, education, healthcare, sanitation, etc. And this is actually the same, but it actually covers local infrastructure and state-wise education and healthcare. Reporting and accountability on the national level, it's monitored by the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, and here it is monitored by the respective mechanisms of individual state governments. And the MLAs are responsible for submitting the project proposal and utilization reports to the state authorities. The next news that we will be discussing about is that NATO member Finland will be granting US access to 15 military bases. This is nothing but the recent member of the NATO, that is Finland, which joined NATO in April 2023, will be signing a defense pact with the United States, the provision under which US can make use or access 15 military bases of Finland. So this particular topic is important and relevant from Mains GS Paper 2, bilateral, regional and global groupings and agreements involving India and affecting India's interests. And here we will be discussing about NATO, the organization, its establishment, its mission, objectives and India's relationship with that of NATO, and what are the requirements to join NATO. So moving forward, Finland will be signing a defense agreement next week with the US, which will give its access to 15 military bases. So now let us understand what is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So following the World War II, there was threat of the expansion of the Soviet Union. So following that, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization was established in 1949 under the provisions of the NATO Treaty, which is also called as the Washington Treaty. So let's move ahead. So the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, it is nothing but a military alliance established in 1949 by 12 countries. However, the number of members today actually stand at 31. It was established by the North Atlantic Treaty, that is also called as the Washington Treaty, in order to provide collective security against the Soviet Union following the World War II. The main headquarters of NATO is in Brussels, Belgium, and its primary purpose is to guarantee the freedom and security of its members through a mechanism called as collective defense. This particular clause of collective defense was invoked, or it was introduced into NATO after the 9/11 attack of 2001. So this means that an attack on one member is considered as an attack on all, and all the other members are obliged or obligated to come to their defense. So now let's look into the membership of NATO. The current members stand as 31 countries, including the United States, Canada, Germany, Italy, Spain, Turkey, Poland, and the United Kingdom. Recent additions include Finland and North Macedonia that joined in 2023. Requirements. What are the requisite criteria to get into or to join NATO? The membership is currently limited to the European countries, and these nations share NATO's value of democracy, individual liberty, and rule of law. They have a stable and functioning democracy with a strong military, and they must be able to contribute to this clause of collective defense. They will be invited by unanimous consent of all the existing members. Now looking into the benefits of NATO membership. First one, as I told you, is collective defense. The cornerstone of NATO is that it provides members with a very powerful military shield against any kind of external threat. Like I told you, the invocation of Article 5 Collective Defense Clause after 9/11 attacks led to NATO's deployment in Afghanistan. So this shows its collective action against terrorism. Next is the security cooperation and intelligence sharing. As we see that Finland will be granting US access to 15 military bases in order to identify and counter the threats. Next is economic benefits. The cooperation on defense and security can foster trade and economic growth among member states. For example, Poland's economic rise and defense industry has seen an incredible growth after it joined NATO in 1999. So now let us look into India and NATO. So what is the relationship India actually shares with this particular organization? India is not a member of the NATO and has traditionally followed the policy of non-alignment. The next news that we will be discussing here will be about how the hottest Arctic summer has impacted the region both ecologically and economically. So this particular topic is relevant from UPSC syllabus GS paper 3, that is environment and ecology, biodiversity and climate change. And here we'll be discussing about permafrost, what is permafrost thawing, and consequences of the soaring temperatures in the Arctic region. If you look at a previous year question, there was a mains question in 2021 which spoke about the melting of the Arctic ice and the glaciers of the Antarctic and how does it affect the weather patterns and human activities on Earth. So here, the climate of the Arctic and the Antarctic and the effects of climate change in different regions of the world plays an important topic for the exam. So now moving on to the news. There was a recent report which was released by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration 2023 Arctic report. Okay, so this actually talks about the warming of the Arctic, which has observed that the Arctic is warming nearly 4 times faster than the global average since 1979. So let's move further. Let us understand about the Arctic Ocean. So this is the picture of the Arctic Ocean. Arctic is nothing but it is an icy ocean which is surrounded by land. If you can see, this is an icy ocean which is surrounded by the lands of Russia. You have Alaska, Canada, Greenland, Finland and Iceland. So here we have to note, what we have to note here is that while the Antarctic, it is a land surrounded by the ocean, Arctic is an icy ocean surrounded by land. The Arctic takes part of Canada, Finland, Iceland, Norway, Russia, Sweden, Greenland and the United States. So India actually has research stations at the Arctic named as the Himadri in order to carry out the research and the investigations of all the polar processes that are taking place. Now let's look into the consequences of the soaring temperatures in the Arctic. So before that, we need to understand the concept of permafrost and what is the concept of permafrost thawing. So permafrost is nothing but it is the ground that remains consistently frozen for about a period of at least 2 years. So if you look here, the first consequence is subsea permafrost thawing. Thawing is nothing but melting of this permanently frozen ground. Thawing of the subsea permafrost will release the trapped gases of methane and carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and these being the greenhouse gases will definitely increase the Earth's temperature, leading to global warming. Permafrost, as I told you, is any ground that remains completely frozen for at least 2 years straight. And permafrost is commonly found in regions of high mountains and in higher latitudes of the Earth, particularly near the North and South poles. And what is permafrost thawing? It is nothing but the melting of the previously frozen ground, primarily driven by global warming. The second consequence will be food insecurity in western Alaska. So due to the soaring temperatures, there are few species of the ecosystem, especially the fish species like the chum salmon. Their numbers have drastically declined in western Alaska, thereby causing fishery closures and profound food security impacts on the indigenous communities that inhabit those regions. Following this is the wildfires in Canada. Canada already has, it actually has the flora of coniferous trees which are already prone to the process of wildfires. Now, the increasing temperature with almost 40% of Arctic and northern land, Canada has experienced its worst wildfire, which had actually burnt over 10 million acres in the northwestern territories. Next one is flooding. Due to the increase in the temperature or soaring temperature, there has been the melting of the glaciers which have caused unprecedented flooding and severe property damage. Next one is the ice sheet melting of Greenland. So Greenland's ice sheet, which is a significant contributor of sea level rise, has experienced melting at its highest point, that is for the 5th time in 34 years. Let us solve some prelims and mains practice questions. The first question is, consider the following statements. Under MP LAT scheme, the amount is transferred to MP's personal account to carry out works listed in the guidelines. This is wrong because it's transferred directly to the local authorities. MP LATs is a centrally sponsored scheme. No, this is wrong. It's a central sector scheme. The third statement reads, funds under MP LAT scheme cannot be spent in the union territories. This is again wrong, where it can be spent in the UTs, and funds under MP LAT scheme are lapsable every year. No, it is non-lapsable as it can be carried to the next year. Choose the incorrect statements. Option A, only 1. Option B, only 1, 2. Option C, only 1, 2, 3. And option D, all the above. So the answer reads D. Moving on to the next question. With the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, consider the following statements. NATO is a military alliance established under the Washington Treaty. Yes, in 1949, it was established under the NATO Treaty, popularly called as the Washington Treaty. Its headquarters is located in Brussels, Belgium. Yes, this is the correct answer. So which of the statements given above is or are correct? As both are correct, the answer will be C, both 1 and 2. So consider the following countries: the United States, Russia, Denmark, Finland and Norway. How many countries above borders the Arctic Ocean? As we had described, there are options mentioned here: only 2, only 3, only 4 and all. So looking at the map, if we can solve, the answer will be answer D, all the above. Moving forward, consider the following statements regarding the women reservation in India. The 73rd and the 74th constitutional amendments mandated one-third reservation for women in Lok Sabha and the state legislative assemblies. This is wrong because it mandated reservation in the Panchayati Raj institutions and the municipalities. The next one reads, Article 325 of the Constitution guarantees equal rights for both sexes, entitling women to enjoy the same socio-political rights as men. So here, going by the statements, we can see only 2 is correct. So the answer will be option B. Moving ahead, consider the following statements about urban flooding. Urban flooding is caused by meteorological factors such as heavy rainfall, cyclonic storms, and climatic change impacts. Yes, this is correct. The economic impact of urban flooding is typically less severe than rural flooding. No, this is more severe than rural flooding. So option number 2 is ruled out. The third one, anthropogenic factors like urbanization and poor waste disposal and other illegal mining activities significantly contribute to the risk and intensity of urban floods. So this is correct. So it is 1 and 3. So basically option A will be the right answer. Moving forward, the mains practice question for today. Critically analyze the phenomenon of urban flooding, particularly in the context of Indian cities, and discuss the causes, various solutions in mitigating the challenges of urban flooding. So basically, as we had discussed about urban flooding, we can give an introduction about what is urban flooding and how it is distinct from that of rural flooding, the 3 factors that we told in terms of vulnerability, etc. Next, discuss and highlight the increasing trend in the Indian cities. Then, in the body of the answer, discuss the causes, the meteorological as well as the anthropogenic factors like increased encroachment and policy paralysis. And finally, deal with the solutions where we'll discuss about nature-based solutions, the green space and the integrated blue-green infrastructure with global examples can be discussed here, the urban green spaces in flood management, and finally, we can talk about the sponge cities concept and its implementation in the urban areas. So here ends the daily news analysis. For regular updates, please like, share and subscribe to Narayana IAS Academy YouTube channel. Thank you.